us today. This session is an example of our commitment to the membership to do three things: invest more in government relations, be more active in regions outside Ontario, and to more effectively act as a key communications vehicle for the industry. It's our plan to hold these government relations sessions quarterly, and we especially encourage any board members or committee members to attend these meetings, as they will be held in advance of upcoming board meetings. Before I pass this off to Martin Luymes and his team, I'd like to encourage you to get involved if you're not already doing so. Join a committee, join a task force, attend webinars like these, roundtables, and be sure to check out our weekly newsletter and encourage others in your organization to sign up for the newsletter. You can email us at getinvolved@hrai.ca if you'd like to know more about participating on activities like this or other active files. We're also going to be holding a virtual day at Queen's Park on March 2nd. I would encourage people in Ontario to sign up for that. And if you'd like to know more about it, just reach out to us for more details. Hope you enjoy the webinar. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. It's my pleasure to join everyone here today and to do this, to lead on this inaugural quarterly update. As Sandy indicated, this is a bit of a new approach that we're taking. It's an innovation that we want to make a regular habit. Hopefully it'll become a regular habit for our members as well. One of the things that we know in the government relations field and in this important work that we do is people only will express their gratitude and their understanding and their appreciation of the work we do if they actually know about it. And we find that there's a lot of work that's happening, maybe behind the scenes sometimes. Maybe, I think there's a sense that people know that work is going on, but it's really our obligation as leaders within the association to share that information, to communicate regularly with members so that you're aware of the work that we're doing on your behalf. It also creates an opportunity for you to feed into the process and maybe help us to correct our course of action if that's what you feel we need to do, or to show your support, or to be critical, or even to get involved. As Sandy said, there's lots of different ways you can get directly involved in the work that we're doing. So that's all I'm going to say by way of introduction. And now, we thought internally about what we should share in this 1 hour session. We can only do so much in an hour of your time. We can't really talk about everything we're doing, especially not if we include all the regional level and all the regulatory work that's going on an ongoing basis, codes and standards work. It's a very busy organization, and it's really difficult to convey in an hour everything that we're doing. So we want to focus in on a few key things. We're going to talk a little bit about our progress on our key priorities at the federal level for this year, and then we're going to dive into a topic that's become a new one for us, which is engaging with municipalities across the country in their climate action programs. But before we do that, we want to give you a perspective on what's happening in Ottawa. In many ways, I think you are all reading the newspapers and watching what's happening on television, but we are going to rely on our friend Huw Williams to give a quick kind of lay of the land in Ottawa at the moment. Some of you will know Huw. Huw is the president of Impact Public Affairs. That's the firm, a firm that specializes in government and media relations, and a company that HRAI has grown to rely on for advice and support in our political advocacy efforts. Huw has extensive experience in print and broadcast media and has appeared frequently as a corporate spokesperson on CBC and CTV National News. His experience working inside government is also quite diverse, ranging from Chief of Staff to the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada to Senior Special Assistant to the Minister of Constitutional Affairs. At Impact, Huw has developed a consulting practice focused largely on the needs of associations like ours, and he's authored several highly regarded guidebooks published by the Canadian Society of Association Executives. So I'm going to welcome Huw Williams to the stage. And first I'll stop sharing. Huw?
Great, Martin. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'll just bring up my screen here to share with the group as I just give a couple, I think, important remarks that are worth noting. First of all, it's a privilege for us to work with HRAI and the entire HRAI team. I think one of the things that's really special about the association is the ability to be really proactive and walk the talk. Sandy and Martin are always talking about the importance of government affairs to the members, and it's important that there's a mutual engagement on that. But they don't just talk about it; they actually do it. And it's one of the core principles of all of the associations that we work with successfully is that they're focused on advocacy driven, because at the end of the day, that's what members expect is results to make their business lives easier and more effective. I'm going to start at a very high level here to talk about some of the key political dynamics that really set the table for what Martin will talk about in terms of the key issues moving forward. And I think the first area to start is really to look at the political snapshot that you have facing folks in Ottawa. And really, we're in a year where we've just come out of an election, the fall, late summer, where the ballot question was put to Canadians is, how do you want to handle the pandemic? And Canadians looked at that election and decided to return a House of Commons back to Ottawa, which really was very similar to the previous House of Commons. And you can see for the Liberals, their goal was to break that 172 mark to give them a majority government, and they fell just short of that with 159 seats. And I think this map, more than any other, really shows how this government to survive will have to depend on some cooperation from the other parties. If you look at the cooperation on that end, you can see in the light blue is the Bloc Québécois, who can be helpful to pass things, and certainly did so in the last Parliament. The NDP, I think, is the most likely dance partner and has been the most consistent dance partner with 25 seats, almost an exact return to where they were beforehand. But they really hold that balance of power. And the Green Party, despite years of trying to get themselves organized to get seats, has really diminished themselves, as Canadians, I think, have largely decided that if they want to fight the environmental issues, there's two better options for them: the Liberal Party and the NDP. So a lot of people have been trying to figure out how long will this government last. I think the last minority government was a pretty good indication of where minority governments generally go. At the federal level, minority governments generally last 18 months, and then things fall apart for various dynamics. Either the government tries to seize an opportunity to get reelected, or the opposition sees an opportunity to bring down the government, go to the polls, and reset the tables. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this was a little bit of an oddity that the minority government was brought into an election, but contrary to kind of historical trends, they returned the same minority government back, as opposed to deciding the future one way or the other. That may have been pandemic related, but we're not sure. I think one of the elements that's important in this, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on, is how long the Prime Minister decides to let this run. I think in this particular case, you've got the partnership of the NDP, where they really have they're not financially well off. They spent a lot of money in the last election. They're bankrupt in a lot of ways, and for them to use this period of time to regroup, to re-raise money to put them in a position to run another election seems to indicate that they would be the likely dance partner to keep this minority government going 24 months or even up to three years. So I personally predict that's going to be the case, and we'll see how that takes us. These things are wildly unpredictable, but if I was a betting man, I would certainly say this parliament will last longer than the other and will be more productive in some ways. I also think it's interesting when you look at the election analysis and where the MPs sit, is to recognize we have a very divided country. Obviously, we're seeing that in a lot of the banter between and policy conflict between the premiers and the federal government. But if you look at where the mix of the Liberal MPs are, you can't really see much red, considering they took the country. If the red zones indicate where the Liberal members of Parliament reside. And I think the truth of the matter is that they've become much more urbanized in terms of the strongholds that the Liberals hold, both in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. Those regions really delivered this government, the greater GTA area. 50 plus seats went to the Liberals, and as a result, you've got an urban split or urban rural split between the ruling party and the other parties, and you also have some diversity across the country in terms of a split, with only a couple of breakthrough ridings out west in terms of the prairies. I think it's also useful to look at kind of the polling picture. As after we're quite a ways away from the election now, and in some ways it doesn't seem like a long time because government hasn't been as active as they were in their first minority government mandate. But the polling today puts the Conservatives and the Liberals at a pretty close neck and neck pace. In and around that 32 percentage points, and would roughly return a parliament very similar to today. So the public hasn't decided where they're going to go. You look at the NDP, they're still locked in as to where they are. I think one of the interesting things to see is the growth of the People's Party of Canada, where you see they're up at around 6%. And I think there's that rebellious element of the People's Party that is a real threat to the Conservative Party leadership. And I think you've seen that as the Conservatives have rejigged themselves going forward. So the other piece of polling I would layer on top of that, I think that is relevant, is roughly 2/3 of Canadians think that the government's on the right path with respect to the vaccine mandates and vaccine approach, the lockdown approach, and is willing to give them credit. But that number is starting to be chipped away as you look at the trend in that polling going forward. This is perhaps a little bit of an unkind slide, just to talk about the leaders and where they sit. I would say, and this is from talking to the Prime Minister's office even just today, but on a regular basis to check in and where they are on different issues. I think the Prime Minister feels good about his leadership. He feels good about the direction he's taking the country. Feels he has strong caucus backing, although there was some leakage on that today with the chair of the Quebec caucus, Joel Lightbound, coming out and criticizing the government very heavily on mandates. But by and large, I think he feels that he's going to be able to get a progressive agenda through. Aaron O'Toole, I'll show a more complimentary picture of him a little bit later on, but I think it's useful to note that as the protests have risen and the People's Party of Canada has started to rise, it just became an untenable situation that he dragged the party to the middle and was unable to keep that coalition together. And of course, Jagmeet Singh, still loved by his party, calling for a plan, and of course the Bloc Québécois still relevant, being covered by national media as well. A couple things on the Conservative turmoil. Aaron O'Toole, of course, gone, voted out by an arcane public policy law called the Reform Act, where the caucus can actually remove their leader. Brought in an interim leader, Candice Bergen, who you see on the right hand side of your screen. But already we're talking about who's going to replace that in a permanent position. Pierre Poilievre is front and center. He's announced that he's going to run. I know Pierre well. He's a really true conservative. Cut more of the Stephen Harper mold, former political staffer before running for office and being successful. He's definitely one to watch. But again, in leadership races, it's sometimes you get very, very surprising results. I think it's worth talking about the truckers' convoy. Certainly here in Ottawa, our office is right across from Parliament Hill, and we see these folks every day on the way into the office. But it's not just in Ottawa; it's come elsewhere throughout the country. And you're seeing the Ambassador Bridge blocked. You're seeing other important ports of entry for land border ports of entry being blocked. And I think one of the things we'll have a mindful eye towards is how much does that impact the supply chain and business and your members' ability to operate. But it certainly changed the political dynamic that this protest group really led to the removal of Aaron O'Toole, or sparked it. It was the final straw that broke the camel's back. So a couple of things to watch for here. I think as we showed earlier in that map, it's a diverse political map. For HRAI, they have to be focused on a multi-partisan approach, connecting with all the parties, but of course play to the party in power and make sure that as Prime Minister Trudeau drives forward on a progressive agenda, that we're in tune with what they want to accomplish on climate change initiatives. I think Martin and his team are doing a great job on that, along with Kyle and our team. Very proud of the efforts to tie in there. I think the Conservative Party is always a government in waiting, so being able to connect with them should there be a transition in government, also on opposition issues. I think one of the real things that during a minority government situation that makes it particularly tricky is that we need to also connect with the NDP and the Bloc. They hold the balance of power. So meeting with the policy teams at the NDP, meeting with key members of Parliament in the Bloc, and having that proactive national approach. So we're talking to the West, talking to the NDP, talking to the Bloc is really important part of our strategy and our thinking going forward. So I'll pause there, Martin, and turn it over to you. Happy, of course, to take questions or commentary as you go through. So thank you very much for having me on and the great work that you do.
Thank you, Huw. Very much appreciated. I don't know that we could do half of what we do without the support of your team in Ottawa. So it's very much appreciated. It's a great relationship that we've been able to forge. Thanks for helping us today with this discussion. One thing I pick up from Huw's comments that may be obvious to our members, but just worth saying is, we work with the governments we get. And so to some extent, we might have certain agenda issues that we want to bring forward, but as much as possible, it's important for us to try to speak to the government's agenda and to make sure that the interests of our industry are aligned and can be served by that government agenda. So that's a lot of the conversation. When there's a change in government, sometimes we need to change the tone and the direction of our own advocacy accordingly. So I think it's just worth noting that a lot of the themes that we're pressing on right now in Ottawa speak to what the government has identified as their top priorities. And on behalf of the federal government, we thought as part of these quarterly sessions, we would try to keep a variety of faces in front of on your screen. And as much as possible, we want to include some people from government. So I'm going to introduce a video presentation that's coming from Francesco Sarbara. Francesco's represented the riding of Vaughan Woodbridge since 2015. He's an economist by training and a CFA charter holder. He's worked in global financial markets, both in Canada and the United States for JP Morgan Chase, DBRS, and the Bank of Nova Scotia. Originally from Prince Rupert, BC, Francesco earned an honors degree in economics and finance from Simon Fraser University and a master's degree in economics from the University of Toronto. Before entering public life, Francesco worked in the private sector for about 20 years. You may remember Francesco from a series of webinars that we conducted early in the pandemic, during which he provided some real meaningful help for members in navigating the CERB and other support programs from the federal government, while also taking forward some of our members' concerns and making them, making some timely course corrections in the rollout of those programs. So he's not with us except in the form of this video. So I'm going to ask Loretta to post the video to start it rolling. Okay, here we go.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to welcome you all to the HRAI Quarterly Government Relations webinar. Since I became Member of Parliament for Vaughan Woodbridge, I've been closely following the work HRAI does and meeting with many members from my riding and from across Canada. I'm sure I speak for all my colleagues when I say we are looking forward to seeing you again here in Ottawa. Despite all the challenges we have faced in the last 2 years, HRAI members have demonstrated great resilience and continue to lead the way in retrofitting buildings and houses with energy-efficient equipment. For over 50 years, with your support, HRAI has contributed to Canada's economic growth, and with more than 50,000 Canadians employed, HRAI plays an important role in Canada's economic recovery and our plan to build a greener future. The pandemic has been hard on all Canadians, some more than others. We know it's time to move forward and continue building the Canada we are all proud to call home. I want to say thank you for doing your part to help end the fight against COVID-19, from receiving your vaccine to following public health advice and checking in on our friends and neighbors. Your efforts have made a difference. The best way to show our appreciation is by ensuring you have access to the tools you need to keep your business growing. Canadian businesses are the backbone of our economy, and our government will continue to have their backs. That's why we recently announced the extension of the CEBA and RRF loan forgiveness repayment deadlines. Our government has implemented measures like the wage and hiring support, the Jobs and Growth Fund, Additionally, we extended the maximum duration of the work sharing program from 38 weeks to 76 weeks. We're working hard to deliver Canadians the support they need to keep their business doors open and their employees on payroll. We will continue working with partners like HRAI to ensure Canadians are supported as we build back better and transition to a green economy.
Thank you, Francesco. And thanks for all your support over the past couple of years. It's actually refreshing that we can shift from a focus on COVID-19 and addressing the pandemic and implications to some of the more important themes for the industry, like IAQ and addressing climate change through home and building retrofit. So I'm going to turn to that and what we're working on in terms of our current federal priorities. Let me just sure I've got the right one here. And Loretta, will you confirm that you were seeing the right one? Or do I need to switch?
Yes, you're seeing the right one.
So the display version, not my notes. Okay, good, thank you. So as I said earlier, for us to, in an hour, to try to capture all of the different activities of HRAI would be a real challenge. And so we're not going to try to do that in each quarterly meeting. In each of these sessions, we're going to focus on different themes. We'll probably drill down at some point to work at the different, in the different regions that we serve. We will perhaps focus on different sectors that we've been working with. We might do some sessions specifically on regulatory files, things like Amendment 17 and what we're doing with HRV manufacturers. There's lots of work that's going on behind the scenes on your behalf. So we'll focus in the different meetings that you'll be, hopefully you'll make part of your schedule. We'll focus on different topics at different times. For this first session, we thought we would focus initially on our progress against some of our federal priorities. Now, there's lots of things we're working on at the federal level. Probably the simplest way to capture them is by talking about our our pre-budget submission. I'm not sure how that happened. Forgive me. Right. So, on the advice of people like Huw and his team at Impact, budgets are always a way of expressing to the government what our top priorities are. They don't always involve major expenditure outlays necessarily. Sometimes they do, but it's our way of telling the government, if we're going to spend taxpayer dollars, or if you're going to spend them in a way that's helpful for our industry, these are the things we would prioritize. Not everything you're going to see in this short list is really involves a big expenditure of dollars. But these are some of the things we heard from our members that they wanted prioritized. And the first is we're looking for a program to support energy efficiency upgrades for industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings, the ICI sector. We'll talk about that in a minute. We also asked about supporting investments in indoor air quality upgrades. In the context of COVID, this has suddenly become a very important topic, and we're trying to leverage that by encouraging through federal government support that building owners in the private sector invest more in improving the indoor air quality of the buildings that they own and operate. We asked in our budget submission for what was a very top of mind topic at the time last summer and fall, was to have better engagement on programs such as greener homes. Again, not really a big budget ask, but more a policy that we were looking for. Fourthly, we asked for the government to implement the Canada Apprenticeship Service Program, which I'll explain in a second. And finally, we were looking for financial support for our workforce development plan, which is really a plan on behalf of the industry to help transition workers and business owners to the opportunities that will come from a low carbon economy. So let me report on where we're at with these different priorities, these asks. On the first topic, support for improving the energy efficiency in commercial buildings. I have to say, we haven't seen any new programs coming out of NRCan as yet. They have been very much fixated on improving and perfecting, if that's the right way to put it, the Greener Homes program. So that is currently a priority, and other program initiatives have really been put to the side for the time being. Having said that, I would point out to members who are interested in this area, if you're mainly in the commercial space, there are no fewer than 150 programs in market as we speak across the country, mostly supported by provinces, local utilities, and municipalities. So there's a lot of programs out there. You can actually find them on a database that's hosted by NRCan if you're interested. But we would still like to see a comprehensive program supported by the federal government that addresses improving the performance of commercial buildings. They haven't done that as yet, but as it happens, Environment and Climate Change Canada has recently reopened their Low Carbon Economy Fund, which has several project funding streams. They include what's called the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund, which is mostly to support some of those provincial and territorial programs I mentioned, and more recently the Low Carbon Economy Challenge, which has just recently been opened up for project applications. There's a lot of money in that fund, and we're trying to figure out at HRAI how we might tap into that. There's not a lot of opportunity for broad scale programs that would affect all of our members. These are more like funding, it's a funding support for specific projects, but we do think there may be a way to support our members in putting forward good ideas that are fundable to support investments in commercial buildings. So there's some room, some things to work with there. Oops. The second ask was around the IAQ incentives for ICI buildings. And on that one, we got a scored, I'm going to say kind of a direct hit with the program that was announced close to the end of December in the Finance Minister's Economic and Fiscal Update. At that time, they introduced the Small Business IAQ Improvement Tax Credit, which is a 25% tax credit on eligible IAQ-related HVAC purchases or upgrades. It's a retroactive program. It hasn't actually been finalized as yet. It has to, I don't think it's gone through final reading in the legislature. But when activated, it will be retroactive to September 1st, 2021, and will run to the end of this calendar year. The credit will apply to purchase of standalone HEPA units up to $10,000 per location and up to $50,000 in total. That's I should say that's not the only measure. It's multiple HVAC related measures, but they include purchases of standalone HEPA units. The government also beefed up their support for the Safe Return to Class Fund, which is obviously directed at schools. They added another $100 million to support that funding arrangement. And I would say this was very much a direct response. Even some of the wording in the announcement directly reflected the budget submission that we made. The other ask I mentioned earlier that really wasn't a dollars and cents request on our part was to encourage the federal government to engage a little more constructively on the design and rollout of programs like Greener Homes. There was a lot of input from industry when that program was first introduced. People identified the problems pretty quickly, and there were a lot of them. And they really were, in some ways, a consequence of the lack of consultation that NRCan did with industry. A lot of these problems could have been foreseen and avoided with a little more careful consultation. So that was really our ask. I will say that generally speaking, the flaws are now well known by NRCan, and they've kind of gotten the message. They've worked very diligently on updating their product lists. They're still not 100% correct, as I'm hearing from some in the industry. There are still major blockages in the ability to pursue the work because of a shortage of energy advisors, which is really something that should have been thought through prior to the launch of the program. And but I will say that NRCan has committed to HRAI to hearing industry input, ideas for program tweaks, not even just tweaks, but changes in the direction and what kinds of products might be covered. There's been lots of input from industry on that. They've been a little bit resistant in the early days to just make a change on the fly. But what they have done is they've invited us to regularly consult with them. I've been able to assemble a pretty good committee of industry people, about a dozen, who have met on a number of occasions already now with NRCan to provide commentary and recommendations to them on how greener homes might be improved to work more effectively for the industry and for Canadians. Most recently, the direction that we're hearing from members and that we're communicating to NRCan is about the need for the program to rely on properly qualified contractors. There really is no provision currently in the program other than what's called a contractor attestation form. It's a sign-off by any contractor who does work, simply saying, I'm a qualified contractor, take my word for it. And I think there's some skepticism about that in the industry, in the sense that maybe we need to do a little better. So we are advocating with the federal government that they introduce some support, maybe even for an industry managed program where we would vet contractors and make sure that the people who are doing the work are installing according to proper design and installation practices. But that, I'm going to say, is still probably a fair ways off. Even the discussion has been postponed a couple of times because they're very busy. But I would hope that we might be able to introduce something as early as the fall of 2022. Now, this was an ask that came from some of our members. There was some awareness about the program that the government talked about but hadn't introduced, called the Canada Apprenticeship Service, which is really funding support for apprenticeship intake programs. In the fall, the government did launch that service. They did fund it, and we did explore it. And in the end, came to the conclusion that it was beyond the means of HRAI to manage in the role of what's called an intermediary. We explored what that might mean. It was very administratively complex, very resource intensive, and we had to come to the conclusion it wasn't a good fit for HRAI as it's currently structured. But in the meantime, the federal government has also introduced a national skilled trades advertising campaign, which we're very supportive of. There is a strong commitment from this government to workforce development, and that's something we're trying to leverage. It's partly about job creation, but it's also very much about making sure our industry can transition to emerging needs and address some of the skills gaps that currently exist. And on that point, our last ask was, we've been approaching Employment and Social Development Canada, or ESDC, over the past year for funding support. Our ask was pretty modest compared to some of the other kind of budget commitments the government makes. We asked for $5 million to support a plan that we wanted to execute to help our members and industry personnel across the sector in their transition to working with low carbon technologies. That includes programs, new training, upskilling and reskilling of existing technicians. It's about drawing new people into the industry. It includes support for work that we're already doing to establish a residential trade in all provinces focused on heat pumps. That's work we're doing in the Maritime provinces currently in British Columbia. We're asking for some funding support to help move that agenda along more quickly. And it also includes things like sales training for contractors and assistance to show them the opportunities and how to take advantage of the opportunities that will come from the move to low carbon technologies. So we received a very positive response to our submission and had lots of support from NRCan, Environment Climate Change Canada, a number of utilities and provincial governments even voiced support, as did some of our allies like the Canada Green Building Council and Efficiency Canada. But at the end of the day, I was told by the minister's office, and it wasn't until December, which was 6 months after the decision should have been made, that they were oversubscribed in that program 20-fold. They had $1.4 billion in requests for funding and $72 million to allocate. So they focused narrowly on some programs that were focused very specifically on the healthcare sector and left everything else off the table. Since then, they've relaunched a program now called the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program, which has more generous funding, and we're exploring tapping into that resource as a way of supporting the plan that we intend to execute this plan either way, but we feel like it might work a little better and we might be able to progress a little more quickly if we have that funding support from the feds. So that's where we are. In summary, I will say again, this is specifically on the budget requests we made last fall. We're making progress on most fronts. I want to say this is an ongoing process. It's not like one and done. There is a new round of budget consultations that just started and a deadline of February 25th. So we're going to be working with IPA again to make a submission. That submission will include some of the same asks, but probably sharpened and refined in light of new information. And I'll say that, again, I know I've said it already, but the budget process is really only one of many ways that HRAI engages with government. But the purpose it serves, in addition to unlocking dollars that we can leverage, it's really about sending signals to government about what our priorities are. And we'll continue to do that. We are continuously engaged with departments like NRCan, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Employment and Social Development Canada, and others, Infrastructure Canada, to support these priorities. So I just want to say that so you don't think that it's all about a budget submission and then we leave it alone and see what happens. There's a continuous engagement process that supports that. Okay, so that's a little bit of a progress update on our top federal priorities. When we're talking internally about how we might spend the balance of our hour, one of the things that's become more and more prevalent in our discussions is our engagement with municipalities. It's happening more and more, trying to respond to municipal climate action plans. These are relatively new phenomenon. Most of the work that's happened in this, on climate action has been at the federal level and to some extent at the provincial level. The original plan under the Pan-Canadian framework was that the federal government would really just shepherd the work that would be done for the most part at the provincial level. This was in respect of the different geographies across the country, different energy needs, different mix of how electricity is generated across the country, and some, respect for the constitutional rights of the provinces. But I will say that for the most part, that hasn't worked out as well as the federal government had hoped. So they were hoping to kind of guide the path and maybe allocate dollars to where they were needed, but we haven't seen the same level of support for those federal priorities in all provinces. So even though all provinces signed on officially to the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Action back in 2015, this is in response to the Paris Climate Agreement, I would say despite that, participation or action at the provincial level has been very uneven. So more and more what's happened in the void is that more and more municipalities across the country have declared climate emergencies and have adopted their own climate action plans. And it really varies what they've been able to do. To support that, the federal government already 3 years ago, two years ago at least, I think it may even be 3 years ago, allocated more than $1 billion to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to assist in those municipal action plans, at the very least to help municipalities to develop their plans. How they access capital to fund those plans is a different matter, but developing of their plans is very much supported by the federal government through that allocation of funds to FCM. FCM reports that they funded 66 municipal action plans, and on their website, I checked it yesterday, they report that there are more than 200 communities across Canada that now have what they call a community energy plan, which is a little broader than a climate action plan. It really just talks about how energy will be planned for within their jurisdiction. So these climate action plans have proliferated. One that's gotten a lot of attention is the city of Vancouver because it's very bold. More recently, the city of Toronto has introduced a very bold plan called Transform TO. Halifax is working on a plan. We've been talking to Winnipeg, Moncton, and the list goes on. These are all municipalities that at some point in the last couple of years, we've had some conversation with. Not all of them have led to a lot of engagement. Some of these municipalities have started, but not gotten very far down the path of aggressive climate action. Some are pretty far down the path. So it's a real mixed bag. And as you can imagine, that creates some challenges for the industry. So just as a, without, at some later date, in fact, we'll let some of these municipalities speak for themselves. The City of Toronto very much wants to engage with members in their region on what they have in mind and how they can work with the HVAC industry. So they want to do a webinar, they want to do some engagement with our members in the GTA. The same is true in Vancouver. We've been very engaged with them. Winnipeg recently, we've had some conversations. So we really are responding to plans as they exist, but those plans vary tremendously from one place to the next. So without going through, what Vancouver is doing versus what Toronto is doing versus Halifax or Winnipeg, they're all over the map, literally. These are some of the typical elements in plans, some of which are welcomed by industry, some of them are maybe not as welcome. One is typically these plans include a carbon reduction target that either mimics or often exceeds federal guidelines or timelines. So Vancouver, for example, and Toronto has said this too. Yes, there's the federal target of every new home, every new building by 2030 has to be zero carbon. We're going to pull that date a little bit forward, and same for all existing buildings. So that can create problems for the industry, but that's one element in these plans that's caused a little bit of a reaction. Building code is revisions to building code and new bylaws to restrict fossil fuel use for space and water heating is I'm going to say a core element of almost every plan. They've looked at streamlining permitting processes for certain types of work, such as heat pumps. A lot of emphasis on heat pumps, and particularly air source heat pumps in these plans. Many of these plans include financial top-ups to existing federal or provincial rebate programs. A lot of them include building performance standards, such as the recent Toronto introduction of the Toronto Green Standard, version 4, very aggressive, which will be rolled out in May of this year. They include investments in installation and or sales training for contractors. In fact, without going into a lengthy description of it, HRAI has been invited and now has come into an agreement with, I want to say it's 7 or 8 municipalities, some based in Ontario, some based in Alberta, to support a training program for HVAC contractors talking about effective ways to sell heat pumps to a market that maybe doesn't understand it. And actually, in many cases, the contractors don't really either don't understand the technology or have difficulty selling it against the status quo. So they've agreed to fund some training that HRAI is developing and will be rolling out in the months ahead. That's an example of the kind of support. It's actually relatively low cost for municipalities to support that kind of industry development. A lot of their money, a lot of their plans are focused on information and awareness raising among end users. That's homeowners, commercial building owners, and so on. Almost all of them, this is something we always tell them they should do, is lead by example. So municipal owned buildings are required to meet a higher standard. Toronto recently introduced a development charge refund program. So if certain standards are met in a new project, they can recover their development charges as a way of incentivizing. And in some ways, most importantly, there's a program that in Ontario is called the Local Improvement Charge. It's often called PACE financing, or Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing, which is financing on the tax bill. So Toronto is introducing a program of up to $75,000 financing over 20 years, which is a nice long repayment period that we believe will support deeper energy retrofits to homes. So these are some of the elements. This is not everything, and not every plan includes all of these elements. Some are very light on these. Some of the plans that we've seen in some jurisdictions are really just about sharing with citizens the things that they might want to do in their own homes and their lives to reduce their carbon impact. In other cases, they're much more aggressive. And mostly this depends on the political leaning of the council that's in power. So if they're committed to climate action, then we'll see much deeper and more deliberate plans. In other cases, might call them a little more like greenwashing, trying to show that they're doing the right thing, but not necessarily showing a lot of commitment. The challenges that these programs or that these plans create for HRAI in the industry there's several serious challenges. One, they focus invariably on improving performance in new buildings, either via code or incentives or variety of measures. And that's our bread and butter. That's the business of the industry. So we're all about energy performance. It's about keeping the heat and cooling in buildings, but so much of that is wrapped up in energy that these policies invariably affect our sector. They might also talk about transit and all kinds of other measures, but they almost always talk about building code and retrofitting existing buildings. So that affects our industry in almost all cases. The focus on building retrofits, electrification, and heat pumps creates opportunities for our sector, but also potential disruptions in supply and the availability of supply, and even the availability of qualified people to do the work. That's something we bumped into more than once. A big challenge that we faced more than once is that these plans have been developed with minimal industry consultation. In fact, that's in some ways the foremost problem is we have people who are very well motivated, who go into a room somewhere and come up with a plan that really looks great on paper, and they don't really spend a lot of time talking to industry about whether or not the plan is achievable, whether or not it's going to create any disruption. So that inevitably creates problems for us. So it's a challenge for us at HRAI to engage in a strategic and efficient way due just to the volume of activity. I showed you 18 different municipalities earlier. There's many more than that when you go to smaller jurisdictions. Some municipalities are also very new to this activity, meaning they have to go through their own learning curve. And it's not always easy. We have to spend a lot of time educating staff people within these various jurisdictions about how the industry works, how the technology works, what the minimum requirements should be, what the qualifications ought to be for qualified technicians and installers. And so often the industry is forced into reactive mode because we're just brought in at the 11th hour. This has happened more than once, and it's an unfortunate thing. So we're going to try to address this more strategically. This is a challenge for HRAI given the resources that we have, but we are going to develop a strategy for more effective engagement at this level. That means a number of things. One, we have to deliver consistent messaging on principles and recommendations that the industry will support. We want a constructive approach to engagement wherever possible. We don't want to always appear negative. We want to be supportive because we can see that there are opportunities that these programs will create for the industry. But we also need to be prepared to resist on certain measures when necessary. If the industry can't deliver, we need to communicate that also to these governments. We also encourage municipalities to collaborate and adopt a consistent approach. A lot of our discussions in Ontario, at our urging, we've talked to the City of Ottawa as an example, and at the same time Toronto and Durham region and Guelph and a few others. And we encourage them to collaborate, to get together and talk to each other first, and then engage with us so that the advice we're providing, the design of different measures that they might consider was uniform across, at least across certain regions, if not across the whole province. And part of our strategy will be going forward to work proactively, to engage more proactively, to reach out to municipalities rather than being always in response mode. And we'll leverage NRCan. We've had some discussions with the Office of Energy Efficiency there, and they very much support the idea of engaging through a platform that HRAI might create in partnership with government and others, other industry associations, to engage with multiple municipalities at once. We want to work through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and other pan-Canadian platforms, things like Efficiency Canada, Canada Green Building Council, and others who have shared interests to reach more municipalities more efficiently. In the meantime, however, we have to engage when we're asked. So we're doing a lot of that work on behalf of members as we speak. So I'm going to now invite some of the people from my team to join this discussion briefly to comment on what they found. So I'm going to start with Victoria Cross, who is our government relations lead in British Columbia. And I'm going to see if Victoria can join us and maybe share some comments from her perspective in our regular engagement with the City of Vancouver and some other municipalities in BC. Victoria?
Great, thanks Martin, and hi everyone, glad to be here, thanks for having me. So, you know, BC is kind of always at the front edge of some of these climate policies. And so, we're seeing a growing public appetite and political will really to continue to advance policies. And this is even more true at the municipal level. Recently we saw this play out in Vancouver when given the chance to pull back on the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Council voted to continue on and push it forward after several days of public comment and some presentations from staff. So, kind of from our perspective, there's always nuance, but in this current context, we're finding that taking the path of hardline resistance on the climate file can hurt our credibility. And more importantly, it's becoming less effective. So over the past couple of years, we've started to shift our strategy and our approach with municipalities to one where we're more directly engaged with key staff and decision makers and working more collaboratively. So recently, particularly in BC, this approach has allowed us to engage earlier, and it helps us kind of better understand the political context and what the goals are of the municipality. And so this kind of allows us to work towards better policy outcomes that do a better job reflecting your industry expertise. Oh, Martin, I think you're muted. Yeah.
How often have we heard that? I'd next like to invite Chelsea Goberdan, who's our government relations lead in Ontario, to comment on her observations to date in engagement with municipalities. Chelsea?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Martin. The two key insights that I think I can share with this group really echo what Martin said earlier. One being that municipalities in Ontario are really recognizing the benefits of collaboration amongst themselves, the information sharing, knowledge sharing, idea sharing. We're really seeing that in larger municipalities like the City of Ottawa, City of Toronto, Guelph region, for example, coming together and sharing those ideas. So seeing some cohesion in the ideas that are being put forward. And I would like to highlight this one specifically for our members because this will show some, and I hope will yield some consistency in the similar jurisdictions. A lot of our members work and service multiple municipalities that are close in geographic proximity. So having consistency in the policy and programs and having some alignment that's offered by municipalities, I think will be very beneficial for our contractors. And the second insight I'd like to share is really that emphasis on contractor training that we're seeing from municipalities. So understanding that we need to prepare contractors not just with technical skills, but also that know-how of how to sell low carbon solutions. And again, like Martin mentioned, this is an action item that HRAI is working on. So developing suitable offerings to educate contractors on the approaches that municipalities are offering, as well as how they can best sell these low carbon solutions.
Thank you, Chelsea. And now I'd like to ask Jay Pasemko, who is our lead in the Atlantic region, to comment on the recent findings related to the recent introduction of climate plan in Halifax. Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be part of this conversation. I appreciate this. As Martin had referenced, there is a pretty concrete example here that we're working with, which is the Halifax Regional Municipality, which makes up almost half of the population of Nova Scotia. And their plan is Halifax 2050, and it's got some very impactful goals that will impact the industry. And kind of one of our real learnings working with the HRM is really kind of starting that conversation on the ground floor. And what I mean by that is plans always change, and as they change, it's kind of important to have a voice early on. As Martin had referenced as well, industry doesn't seem to be brought in the early stages for different reasons, but it's important to kind of get that input in there at an early stage. That way, as things evolve, we can kind of adapt appropriately. The changes that they're, for example, talking about for Halifax 2050 will have an impact on things like resources of our contractor members and manufacturers. So we're working hard to kind of make sure that voice is there in those consultations.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to the whole team for joining with some of those observations. I think they do reflect the general findings. There's lots of other people at HRAI who are involved in discussions on an ongoing basis too. But Victoria, Chelsea, and Jay are kind of on the front line with some local work. So we thought we'd share that. Now, I'm not going to have time to go through some of what I wanted to, but I'm going to invite members. I have a series of, well, I guess the messaging that I was talking about before. We need to have consistent messaging. We've developed some of that messaging, and it talks about the needs that industry has in relation to these programs. We need timelines. We need consultation. We need to consider, financing tools. There's a variety of things that we've recommended that municipalities think about as they develop these plans. We don't have time to go into that in detail. Some of that was reflected in what you just heard. But what I would be happy to do, if anyone's interested in that, if anyone wants to be engaged and maybe involved with their local community, maybe it's a small community, maybe it's an urban center that's looking at developing a plan, and you might want to be part of that discussion. What are some of the industry themes? We'd be happy to help you with that. In fact, this is a really great way to engage with HRAI at the local level. We will work with chapters. We'll work with people, our members across the country, to be engaged directly with their municipalities. We can give you the messaging. There's some really important key points, some very specific recommendations that we tend to make about timelines and a whole lot of things like that. But this is the high level message that we share, if I can summarize. And it's really simple, that the HVAC industry is prepared to engage with governments at all levels. We do this all the time. As I said earlier, we are engaged federally and provincially, with territories even. We have been for decades. And now at the municipal level too, to assist in meeting the challenges of the Paris Agreement. However, we need to state boldly that success in achieving these ambitious targets really depends on heeding industry advice and working collaboratively with private sector partners. That's our core message when we sit down with governments across the country. It's, we'll work with you. In fact, we can say without any fear of contradiction, to some extent, the success of these programs, of these measures, depends on the buy-in and acceptance of our sector. We've said this about greener homes more than once. If the government just listened to what our members were saying, the program would have a much greater chance of success. So it's a mutual win-win. That's the general message that we share. So I'll thank you on that note for your participation today. And I think we have maybe a couple of minutes, or maybe we don't, for questions. We'll share the slide deck with anyone who wants it. I'll just say very quickly that we want to invite you to be more engaged, be as engaged as possible. We are planning in Ontario a Queen's Park Day. Chelsea's doing some outreach right now to engage our members directly with elected MPPs at Queen's Park. Last year we had a very successful event. It's all done virtually, so you can do these meetings from your own office or your own home, as the case may be, and engage with either your local MPP or maybe a minister or the deputy minister, with elected officials to help deliver some of the messaging. We'll help you with the messaging, but we are looking for volunteers. That's one way to engage. If you're interested in engaging with the federal government, we will be planning a day on the Hill, again virtually, sometime later in the spring. So if there's an interest, just reach out to us. Our names are there. You can see our phone numbers. Feel free to call. Feel free to send an email, and we'll respond in a timely fashion. Thank you all for joining. And I only saw one question, and maybe I can answer this one very quickly, about greener homes. How do we know when the funding will be completely exhausted? We don't, except they will have to track those expenditures. And what they've told us is the budget allocations are annual. They have not hit their budget for this year because of the backlogs, and that it's a 7-year long program, and it will be continuously refunded on an annual basis. So I'm not sure there's any real worry about them running out of money in the short term, except for the fact that not many of the jobs are happening because of the backlog with energy advisors. hopefully that answers your question. We will share the deck, as I said, and please feel free to reach out to any one of us. Thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great remainder of your day.